I'm Dan Drake. This is Visitor Network TV, Channel 99. With us today is SarahOktay. Sarah is known to many as the director of the UMass Boston Field Station, and also plays a role in several local organizations. The one we want to talk about today a little bit is the Conservation Commission, the CONCOM, of which you are chair.
Vice chair.
Vice chair.
Ernie is
Vice
chair. Yeah.
Vice chair. Excuse me. But obviously the Sconset Beach program is something that's in front of the Conservation Commission on a continuing basis. So it's difficult for you to talk about that, I understand.
Right. Yeah.
But I'd like to just talk about the whole concept of erosion control and so forth, because you seem to have a fairly firm view on that and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, and I'd like just to hear about that and hear about how you feel and how you sort of came to your conclusions.
Well, and all of this leads into the coastal management plan too, which I am the chair of that committee, and the town is thinking ahead and trying to figure out what our infrastructure is around the island and what type of erosion control measures, if any, are appropriate in different parts of the island to deal with erosion control, homeland security, sea level rise, and all the things that are important to an island that's 110 feet less, in proportion to the rest of the United States. So I'm a chemical oceanographer. A lot of people don't know that. I do a lot of sediment geochemistry, and I've had, not only my doctorate, but my undergraduate degree included coastal geology. So, and I have a lot of friends and colleagues I work with over the years that are coastal geologists. So that's the advantage I have when I'm approaching these problems, is I have a lot of friends and some experience in coastal geology and in coastal dynamics. And I've given several talks on what happens at the seashore and in the coast. The problem with coastal erosion is it takes sand and material away from one area and deposits it elsewhere. And anything that you do to try to stop that can potentially starve the downdrift beaches. So that's a concern that people have. So a coastal bluff, for instance, serves two different functions or multiple functions. Wildlife can live and use a bluff. It has storm protection, so it protects land behind the bluff from being impacted by waves. And it also provides sediment to all the downdrift areas. So
now, downdrift is where the current goes.
Where the current goes. And that changes throughout the year based on the prevailing winds. But there is a base current that runs all around the ocean, but there are short-term currents and currents that just occur as a result of storm and wind and waves. So in the wintertime we have more northeasterly type wind, and so it builds up waves coming from the northeast, and in the summer it's coming from the southwest. So, for instance, an area like the east coast of Nantucket, most material goes and builds up Eel Point and that rip right along Eel Point and helps fill in right where Sacagawea Beach is. It's what helps seal up Sacagawea whenever we open it each year.
Eel Point, you'd say?
I'm sorry, not Eel Point, I'm sorry. Smith's Point.
Smith's Point.
Not even Smith's Point. Great Point.
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
Yeah, not Eel Point. Well,
No.
I mean, some of it might
There's
get there.
a lot going out there from somewhere.
And there are. So all the way around the island, there are areas that are eroding, and that sand is moving and building up beaches elsewhere. And the interesting
Sort of goes back to the basic theory of physics. For every action, there's a reaction.
Right. And for Codfish Park and for Sankaty, there's what's called a nodal point there. So there's a point about midway up along the length of that coast where some of the material goes north and some of the other material goes south. So not only does it feed Great Point and the Rip, but some of that material that erodes there feeds Codfish Park. So I've been measuring.
I mean, if you go to the south shore of the island, you've got Point of Breakers.
Right.
Which is a very obvious area for currents going in two different directions. You don't have that on the east side of the island that I'm aware of. Anything
no, not
that you can visit. At least it's visible.
Right. That's not super obvious. But if we did an experiment where we completely stopped all material from coming off there, we would eventually see Codfish Park getting smaller over time. The same with Great Point. Yeah. Okay. And we had all the erosion at Codfish Park in the early 80s. We had 2 rows of houses there. And now, over the last 10 years, that area has grown up about 6 or 7 feet and gone out about 100 feet in width. And we've got nice, big, very mature sand dunes there. So what's really interesting is if you go to Codfish Park Beach, just to see how much that's evolved with all the storms, and a lot of that sand has been deposited there as it orbits the island. So the concern with coastal erosion structures is you want to try to alleviate storm loss and protect property if it qualifies for protection. And for the state of Massachusetts and for the Nantucket, our bylaws, it has to typically be pre-78 or not substantially improved since 1978. Of course, a lot of homes qualify for that around the island. There's different...
Is a house, just as a matter of curiosity, is a house that's been moved count as substantial improvement or not?
Usually no. We got more specific on our bylaws, and our bylaws say that I think if there's been more than a 30% change in the habitable area of the house. So you could redo all your shingles, your roof, you could repaint, or really
move the house.
Yeah, or move the house, and it would still qualify for protection. Okay. And our first, advice to people, and this is nationwide, coastal geologists everywhere will tell you this. I just spoke to 2 or 3 yesterday that are down in the Carolinas. The easiest thing to do is to move your house or retreat. The more, when you try to put seawalls up or geotubes or stuff, you are basically not allowing that beach to react naturally. And so if you stop movement, you're eventually going to have 2 or 3 adverse impacts. And that's a concern for both the state and for us, is are your adverse impacts going to affect your neighbors or the beach that all of us use? So for things like rocks or gabions, typically...
What are gabions?
Gabions are rocks that are inside big baskets. So basically a revetment that's enclosed in wire or a basket. At least those are semi-natural materials, something like geotextile tubes or plastic, so they're polypropylene, and pretty thick rolls of plastic that are rolled up and filled with sand. Any of those things are called coastal engineering structures, so they differ from things like sand drift fences in that they're designed to stop any erosion at the toe of a bluff. So when a wave hits that hard structure, depending on how it's made and what kind of angle it is, it's going to basically reflect off of it much more brutally than if it had hit soft sand. And instead of taking the sand from the bluff, it's going to take nothing except the sand that's on top of it for nourishment. So when it reflects off, it's going to reflect with a stronger amount of energy, and it's going to erode that beach in front of it. So if you walk around the island, and I think this is really informative for people. I go to the town's GIS all the time, and I zoom in using the town GIS to look at different parts of the island and different hard structures. And you can see bulkheads and revetments and things that have been built completely legally for the last 100, 200 years, groins. And it really helps you understand how sand moves by examining it with your own eyes. So you can see areas where a bulkhead or there's several not too far from Washing Pond that are very obvious on the north side of the island. And you can look at the land on either side of it, and you can see end scours, the first thing you're going to notice. And that's where more sand is taken away from both ends, because it's going to take preferentially from the soft material that's outside of that hard material. You'll also see a loss of beach. The beach basically disappears in front of a bulkhead, and any of us knows that walking around the island. If you're in front of a bulkhead in the winter, there's no beach. You're walking in the water. If you're in front of a sandy area, there is a beach. That beach retreats in the winter and grows in the summer, but it's allowed to be organic and to move. So one of the concerns is loss of beach in front from any hard structure. The other thing would be the end scour. The other thing that happens is a promontory effect. When that piece of property doesn't erode and the parts erode on either side, it basically slowly forms a peninsula or promontory. You can see that in several well-known applications around the island. And I was showing a construction worker this a couple of days ago, and he was really shocked. He had just never looked using the town's GIS. A good example... Yeah,
do you have an example?
Well, a good example is at the field station. So the field station, where one of my main dorms is 39.5 feet from the edge of a quickly eroding bluff. That bluff has been picking up and accelerating its erosion. We've lost all the vegetation down the entire length of the bluff. This is all Conservation Foundation property, so of course we're not necessarily considering a coastal erosion structure. We have a revetment on the far eastern end of our property, and you can easily see there's rocks piled up there, and all of that's legal, and there's an old bulkhead that was installed legally pre-78. But there's a huge chunk of our land that's fallen in based just right adjacent to that. From scouring. If you just go 100 yards, you can see that there's less erosion there. So a lot of people say, oh, it's just my material staying there and everything's eroding back because it's not protected. And you're going, no, there's actually an acceleration of land lost because of that hard structure. And it's very easy to see. All you have to do is draw a straight line out to the next furthest west portion. And you go, oh, okay, that's where the bluff would be if that wasn't there. And you can do that all the way around the island. So, you know, there's things the town is doing to trying to, you know, purchase properties. Do we have paper roads or something? You know, whose land do we take when either an individual or the town installs an erosion control project? You know, who are we impacting, and what does that impact mean, both financially and, you know, to the system itself? So.